At the crowded terminal of a major airport, a 42-year-old single mother approached the check-in counter, clutching a first-class ticket and a multi-million-dollar contract secured in her sleek briefcase. Yet, instead of the respect befitting a senior corporate strategist, she faced a piercing stare from a prejudiced male employee, as if she had wandered into a realm not meant for her. "This line is for first-class passengers," he said, his words not merely an error but a veiled insult dressed as procedure. Unbeknownst to those present, within minutes, the woman they tried to dismiss from the elite queue would halt Skypulse Airlines' entire operations, pull top executives from their boardrooms, and force the service industry to confront its own biases in disgrace. When you underestimate a Latina woman just because she doesn't fit your expected mold, you're not just mistaken, you're sabotaging your own enterprise. And the most devastating part? She didn't raise her voice. She didn't file a lawsuit. One phone call was enough. Discover the true story that compelled an entire corporate system to kneel before the woman it once disrespected. Before dawn broke, Elena Vasquez stepped into the check-in zone at Gate 23 of Miami International Airport. Her black stilettos clicked softly on the polished tile floor, each step deliberate and composed. Her navy blazer, accented by a crimson scarf draped elegantly over her shoulders, projected both authority and understated grace. At 42, Elena was the CEO of Vasquez Green Solutions and a single mother who had navigated challenges most could scarcely fathom. This morning, she carried no tales of her journey, only a first-class ticket and a keynote address for the Global Eco-Food Summit in Seattle. In one hand, she held a worn but pristine black leather satchel, a gift from her daughter, purchased with months of saved allowance for Elena's 40th birthday. In the other, her first-class boarding pass clearly displayed, Elena Vasquez, Flight 392, Seat 2A, MIA to SEA, First Class. The terminal was hushed, with only a handful of travelers milling about, nursing coffees or dragging suitcases, their faces still groggy from early flights. Elena approached the check-in counter, offering a courteous nod to Ethan Caldwell, the young white man stationed there in Skypulse's charcoal uniform. "Good morning," Elena said warmly, extending her ticket. Ethan took the ticket with a brisk motion, glancing at the printed name before pausing. His eyes flicked up, then lingered, a scrutinizing gaze Elena knew all too well, one laced with judgment and doubt. Ethan's brow furrowed slightly. He rechecked the ticket, then looked back at Elena. No greeting, no warmth. His voice, though not raised, carried a sharp edge that pierced the morning calm. "This line's for first-class passengers, ma'am." Elena didn't flinch. She didn't offer a forced smile. There was no need. She stood taller, her gaze locking onto Ethan's with a quiet, unshakable confidence. "I know," she replied, her voice steady, devoid of agitation. In that instant, anyone nearby might have sensed a subtle tension ripple through Ethan, not from the air but from the presence of a woman who had faced skepticism her entire life yet never yielded to bias. Ethan didn't soften his expression. He didn't immediately process the ticket. His hand hovered, his eyes still fixed on the Latina woman before him, as if expecting further proof that this was a mistake. What no one realized was that the woman under scrutiny wasn't just a traveler. She was the mastermind behind Skypulse Airlines' largest sustainable catering contract to date. But in that moment, standing before a clerk recently transferred from Boise to Miami, that meant nothing. All Ethan saw was a Latina woman in refined attire holding a first-class ticket. And to him, that didn't add up. That was all it took to ignite a subtle but soon-to-be seismic ripple that would grind an entire airline to a standstill. Ethan stood rigid, clutching the ticket but making no move to scan it. Seconds ticked by in tense silence. Then, as if suddenly aware that action was required, he leaned slightly, casting a quick glance toward the back of the counter where a security guard in a crisp black uniform stood by the baggage scanner. The gesture was subtle but deliberate. Ethan Caldwell, barely a month into his transfer from Boise to Miami, was eager to prove himself to his supervisors. In staff briefings, he'd heard endless talk about upholding security and prioritizing VIP passenger protocols, especially at high-traffic hubs like Miami. But no training had ever taught him to spot the bias lurking behind routine check-in procedures. "I'll need to see your ID," Ethan said, his voice steady but his eyes revealing a flicker of unease. Elena tilted her head ever so slightly, her deep brown eyes cutting through the hollow space between his words, seeing the discomfort he was trying to mask. Without a word, she reached into her blazer pocket, retrieved her Florida driver's license, and placed it calmly on the counter. Ethan picked it up, paused for a moment, then did nothing. He didn't scan it. He didn't input her name into the system. He just let it sit there, as if stalling for time. Then he took a step back and murmured something into his radio. Moments later, a broad-shouldered man in a Skypulse security uniform approached. He didn't introduce himself or offer a greeting. He simply positioned himself beside Elena, his stern gaze scanning her as if she posed a potential risk. Elena Vasquez didn't waver. She didn't sigh or show frustration. But inwardly, she recognized the pattern all too well. This wasn't new. Years earlier, at a high-end resort in Phoenix, she'd been barred from a gala because she didn't look like a VIP guest, despite being the event's lead organizer. She'd also endured a boardroom meeting where a colleague assumed she was the assistant fetching coffee, not the strategist leading the deal. And now, dressed in an impeccably tailored blazer, holding a valid first-class ticket, she was being treated as an intruder in a space she rightfully belonged. With her right hand still resting on her leather satchel, Elena slipped her phone from her left pocket. She unlocked it, scrolled swiftly through her contacts, and dialed. It rang twice. "Sophia, it's me," she said evenly. "Pull up the Skypulse contract. The $52 million sustainable catering deal we closed 10 days ago. I'm at Miami, Gate 23. They seem to need a refresher." On the other end, Sofia Mendez, Elena's trusted executive assistant of 8 years, didn't hesitate. "Got it. Pulling the file now," she replied. "Do you want me to call Daniela Torres directly?" Sofia asked. Elena glanced at Ethan, who was now feigning focus on his computer screen. "Not yet," she replied curtly. "Just flagged the alert for now. I think they're about to see the problem." She ended the call. In her hand, the unscanned first-class boarding pass remained. Beside her, the security guard stood like a sentinel, unmoving. Behind her, a growing stream of passengers began to gather, their murmurs rising as they noticed the holdup. "What's happening? Did she do something? Maybe the ticket's not real." Elena caught every whispered word but didn't turn. She stood poised, as if waiting for a bus, her demeanor unshaken. Yet, with each passing second, an unseen tremor was rippling through a vast corporate machine, invisible to those around her. She didn't need to shout. She only needed to be exactly where she was, at precisely the right moment. And that moment had begun. Elena's hand rested firmly on the handle of her leather satchel as she stood at Gate 23, caught between the security guard's icy stare and Ethan's palpable unease. But within her, a quiet calm prevailed, her mind drifting to a humid summer morning in Tampa, Florida, where every seed of her success had been planted amid the tang of citrus and her grandmother's soil-stained hands. Rosa Vasquez, her grandmother, had spent decades as a picker in a local orchard on Hillsborough Avenue. Her days began at 5 a.m., and she never went alone. Elena, a wide-eyed 8-year-old, trailed behind, clutching her grandmother's worn apron as they hauled baskets of oranges, limes, and mangoes from groves to trucks. No one spoke of empires or ambition. But from those early mornings, Elena absorbed how Rosa connected with everyone, farmers, drivers, market vendors, not just through words but with steady gazes, genuine warmth, and unwavering patience. When a buyer wavered over a crate of fruit, Rosa didn't rush them. She'd lift a mango, press it gently, inhale its scent, and say with a smile, "This one. The sun was kind today, it'll taste like summer." Elena learned it all, not from textbooks, but in the dust of orchards and the rhythm of harvests. At 18, while her peers chased dreams of elite colleges, Elena enrolled at Florida State University, studying agribusiness while working nights at a produce distribution center. When others groaned about early shifts, she was already accustomed to the hum of forklifts on dew-slick floors. After graduating with a degree in supply chain management, her only possessions were $500 in savings, a beat-up Honda, and a vision no one else could see: making sustainable, traceable food the backbone of the national supply chain. She began with a small farmer's market stall in suburban Tampa, a hand-painted sign proclaiming, "From soil to your table in 24 hours, always fresh." Skeptics dismissed it until they saw Elena rise at 3:30 a.m. to collect produce, then spend afternoons sorting every tomato, every zucchini by hand. No staff, no backers, just grit and an unyielding conviction. The breakthrough came when she spotted an untapped niche: affordable, traceable food in volumes large enough for major retailers, yet not priced for the elite. While corporations chased premium organic labels for affluent buyers, Elena zeroed in on accessible food for everyday people. She traveled to family farms across Florida, convincing growers to adopt sustainable practices. Then she built a logistics network to deliver their harvests to grocery chains, hospitals, and even airlines. When asked, "Why airlines?" Elena would answer, "Because first class sets the tone for quality, and I want that quality to begin with a clean, honest apple." Vasquez Green Solutions began in a cramped shed with a second-hand laptop that crashed mid-calculation and a chalkboard scribbled with supply chain diagrams. Over 17 years, it grew into a key supplier for 28 major grocery chains, 7 hospital networks, and, most recently, Skypulse Airlines, which had inked a $52 million contract to overhaul its in-flight dining experience. Yet today, at Gate 23, that woman was under suspicion, asked for her ID, and held up by an employee who wielded her fleeting authority without grasping its limits, because Elena was a woman, because she was Latina, because, to Ethan Caldwell, Elena Vasquez didn't fit the image of a first-class passenger. But what Ethan couldn't know was that his actions were about to send shockwaves through an entire corporation. The woman standing calmly at Gate 23, treated as a potential intruder, was the one who had pulled Skypulse Airlines from the brink of a catastrophic PR disaster just 4 months earlier. Back then, Skypulse's name was dragged across social media with images no airline could stomach: congealed in-flight meals, soggy bread resembling cardboard, and plastic wrappers swimming in foil trays. A viral post by a first-class influencer on Instagram showed a meal tray slammed onto a fold-down table, captioned, "Pay thousands to dine like you're in a dumpster." Overnight, Skypulse became a punchline. Its Seattle headquarters went into crisis mode, with executives locked in marathon sessions and the PR team scrambling to scrub thousands of scathing comments daily. An internal memo from the brand strategy team put it bluntly: "This isn't just a menu issue, it's a reputation implosion." That's when Elena Vasquez's name surfaced in a closed-door meeting. Not because she ran glitzy ad campaigns or operated from a sleek Miami high-rise. Her company's headquarters remained in a modest warehouse district in Tampa. But those who knew Elena understood one thing: she didn't pitch transformation, she delivered it, letting the results speak for themselves. When Skypulse reached out, Elena didn't arrive with a polished slide deck or an entourage of analysts. In their 20th floor boardroom, she carried only a printed 40-page proposal and a canvas tote filled with samples: heirloom carrots from a cooperative in Georgia, arugula from North Carolina's Piedmont, and sourdough rolls from a family bakery in Alabama, all wrapped in compostable packaging. As she spread the samples across the table, a Skypulse VP, once a restaurateur, leaned forward and inhaled deeply. Why does this smell like a garden? Is this really a sample? Elena's eyes crinkled with a faint smile. No. This is what you'll serve instead of those frostbitten trays. Her proposal, dubbed the Green Skies Initiative, didn't just swap out ingredients, it re-engineered the airline's entire food supply chain, from farm to flight. A rotating menu updated bi-weekly, sourcing ingredients from farms near flight hubs, cutting out middlemen by contracting directly with growers to secure fair pricing and rigorous quality standards. Fully compostable packaging, slashing airline waste disposal costs by $1.5 million annually. Short shelf-life ingredients for maximum freshness, reducing meal returns by 38%. Within days, Skypulse signed a $52 million contract covering all West Coast and Southern routes, with a clause to extend to transatlantic flights if the pilot phase succeeded. But Elena Vasquez shunned the spotlight. When Skypulse's PR team pitched a campaign video showcasing the Latina CEO behind their dining overhaul, she declined. Don't put my name on the menus. I'm not a logo. The only thing passengers should notice is the food on their tray. But you're the visionary, they insisted. I'm a mother making sure my kid eats clean and the bills get paid, she shot back. Don't make me a poster child. I'm just doing what needs to be done. Yet now, at Gate 23, after rescuing Skypulse from a public relations nightmare and restoring passenger confidence, Elena was being treated as an outsider unfit for the first-class line. No one at Skypulse realized it. Standing there, composed, neither arguing nor raising her voice, she knew exactly what she faced. This wasn't a clerical error or a system hiccup. It was something far more insidious, bias cloaked in protocol. Behind the counter, Ethan Caldwell kept his eyes glued to the screen, feigning a search. He knew there was no glitch. The name matched. The seat matched. The flight matched. But in his mind, something still didn't align. How could someone like her be in seat 2A? Ethan wasn't malicious. He was simply shaped by a culture accustomed to equating success with a specific look, pale skin, polished demeanor, an air of entitlement. Elena didn't match the VIP archetype he'd seen in Skypulse training videos. That mismatch led him to a critical misjudgment, a small error, but one made at the worst moment, with the wrong person. At that very moment, Sofia Mendez, Elena's assistant, had finalized the contract file and emailed it to three key figures: Daniela Torres, Southeast Regional Director of Skypulse, Marcus Webb, Executive Director of In-Flight Services, and Naomi Carter, Head of Brand Reputation. The email's subject was terse: VIP guest Elena Vasquez detained at MIA Gate 23, $52 million contract, recommend reviewing footage and staff. Within 4 minutes, Daniela bolted from a strategy session, her untouched latte abandoned on the conference table. To most, Elena Vasquez might be just a name, but to a regional director like Daniela, it was a name tied to the airline's financial lifeline. As Daniela's heels clicked urgently through Miami International's administrative corridors, one truth crystallized: Elena Vasquez was no longer just a passenger waiting to board. She had become a quiet force, rattling an entire corporate structure. And as Elena's stilettos remained planted at the gate, her boarding pass still in Ethan's hand, the silence grew heavy. It wasn't the casual quiet of travelers awaiting their flight. It was a taut, uneasy stillness, as if the air itself sensed something amiss, felt by all but voiced by none. The crowd behind Elena thickened, travelers tugging suitcases and tapping on phones, their eyes darting toward the counter, puzzled by the delay. Within moments, curiosity morphed into hushed speculation. She's not moving. Probably trying to blag her way into first class. Bet it's a fake ticket. A man in his 50s, wearing a navy jacket and wireless earbuds, leaned toward his companion and muttered, another one thinking a fancy outfit gets you a free upgrade. Elena caught every syllable but didn't flinch. Her expression remained steady, her posture unyielding. She knew this brand of bias too well, the kind that never names itself but clings like damp chill through a cracked window. She stood tall, her gaze unwavering, refusing to dodge or shrink. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. In spaces where privilege is tied to appearance, a Latina woman speaking with clarity risks being branded difficult. Behind the counter, Ethan Caldwell grappled with indecision. His screen showed no discrepancies, the passenger's name, seat, and flight code all checked out. Yet something nagged at him, an unshakable sense of mismatch, like a smudged signature. Logic told him Elena belonged on that flight, but an unacknowledged instinct whispered otherwise. She doesn't look like the usual two-way passenger. Ethan couldn't articulate it, but that vague unease, unspoken, unexamined, was the root of prejudice, a judgment that needed no policy or proof, just a glance and a pause. Beside Elena, the security guard loomed, silent but too close, his shadow grazing her hand. He didn't touch her, but his stance screamed surveillance. The onlookers? They stayed silent. No one questioned the scene. Instead, murmurs took root. A woman in a tailored coat whispered to her friend, probably used miles for the ticket. Skypulse is too lax these days. A young man nearby lifted his phone, snapping a photo without asking, as if it were second nature. Elena didn't turn, but her grip on her satchel's strap tightened, not from rage, but from a familiar ache, the kind she'd learned to bury time and again. In Tampa, when she'd secured her first grocery chain deal, a manager had stopped her at the entrance. Deliveries go to the rear dock. You're in the wrong spot. She hadn't argued, just walked around, signed the form, and left. In Atlanta, shopping for a necklace with her daughter, a clerk had shadowed her every step. When her daughter asked, "Mama, why is he following us?" Elena had smiled softly, "Because I look like someone they're afraid might take something." And now, in a bustling international airport, surrounded by polished procedures and polite phrases, the same tired script played out. Within Skypulse's system, wheels were turning. On the 12th floor of Miami International's operations hub, Daniela Torres received Sofia Mendez's urgent message with an attached file: Elena Vasquez detained at Gate 23. Immediate action needed. In Seattle, Marcus Webb, head of in-flight services, reread the $52 million contract he'd finalized with Vasquez Green Solutions 39 days prior. He knew a public misstep could crater more than just optics, it could tank the airline's bottom line. Elena wasn't just a vendor, she was the linchpin of their upcoming Green Skies Dining campaign. At Gate 23, Ethan's co-worker, Lila, sensed the tension. She sidled over and murmured, "Ethan, is there actually a problem?" He leaned in, eyes still on the monitor, and whispered, "I don't know. Something just feels off. My gut, that's all," Ethan muttered. Lila's brow furrowed. Gut isn't protocol. Her words should have stopped him, but Ethan pressed on. He'd gone too far to backtrack now. Admitting a misstep to the woman he'd misjudged was harder than forging ahead. Amid it all, Elena Vasquez remained silent. Her steady gaze, the same one that had held firm in multi-million-dollar boardroom deals, rebuffed coercive tactics, and navigated shady negotiations, stayed fixed forward, calm, resolute, unflinching. On the 14th floor of Skypulse Seattle headquarters, a porcelain cup clinked against a saucer as Marcus Webb, executive director of in-flight services, read Sofia Mendez's email. Subject: Critical issue at Gate 23, MIA. Attached was the $52 million contract, accompanied by a stark note: Elena Vasquez is being unlawfully detained. Daniela's team is en route. Act now. Marcus's chest tightened. He lurched from his seat, his tablet skidding across the table with a sharp clatter. His colleagues glanced up, but Marcus barely noticed. His mind flashed to the Green Skies dining campaign, built around Elena's vision. They'd filmed her walking through a partner farm, scripted ads with the tagline "Fresh from Soil to Sky," and prepped a magazine feature titled "The Woman Feeding America's Flights." A promotional video featuring her was in final edits. And now, that woman was being held up by a gate agent's hunch. Marcus dialed Daniela Torres, but the call was redundant. In Miami, Daniela had already tossed aside a budget report, grabbed her phone, and stormed out of her office. "Get Naomi and Justin from legal, now, not later," she barked at her assistant. "What's happening?" the assistant called after her. "A gate agent just targeted the wrong person. Not just any passenger, the linchpin of our dining overhaul, the face of our sustainability push, the name that should be on every first-class tray." Daniela strode through the glass-walled corridors overlooking Miami International's tarmac, stunned by the irony. An airline touting its progressive reforms had just tripped over its own biases. Back at Gate 23, as Elena stood like a quiet pillar amid the swelling tide of whispers and judgment, Lila pieced it together. She pulled up the internal vendor database, scrolling to Premium Fresh Contract Q1, Q2. The name Vasquez Green Solutions glowed under code SKP/2025-GS02, with exec. Representative, Elena Vasquez in bold. Lila's breath caught. She spun toward Ethan, her voice low but urgent. "Do you realize who you're holding? Not some random passenger, that's the CEO of Vasquez Green, the company behind our new first-class menus for the next 2 quarters. You're detaining the wrong person." Ethan froze, his eyes flicking from the screen to Elena, who stood poised, as if awaiting an apology from a system she'd once believed had evolved. A torrent of thoughts crashed through his mind. How's she the CEO? Why wasn't I told? Did I screw up? The truth, as always, needed no fanfare, it just needed the right moment. That moment arrived with Daniela Torres. Her heels clicked sharply on the tiled floor, her emerald blazer cutting through the terminal's fluorescent glare. She wasn't alone. Trailing her were Naomi Carter, Skypulse brand reputation lead, and a senior operations coordinator, already relaying updates via earpiece. Ethan stiffened. Lila stepped aside. Daniela didn't need to ask who Elena Vasquez was. Her eyes locked onto the woman beside the security guard, her presence radiating quiet authority. Some people command a space without a title or badge, Elena was one. Daniela approached, extending her hand. "Ms. Vasquez, I'm Daniela Torres, Southeast Regional Director for Skypulse. I deeply apologize for this disruption. May I invite you to a private lounge to resolve this?" Elena met her gaze, slipping her phone into her satchel, and gave a measured nod. "Do you know my seat assignment?" she asked. 2A, Daniela replied instantly. "Curious," Elena said, a faint, razor-sharp smile flickering. "Because I was just told this line was for first-class passengers only." Silence fell. No one spoke. No one needed to. Sometimes, the error isn't in the rules, it's in the eyes that enforce them. It stems from a glance. And a misguided glance wielded by someone unaware can slice through a multi-million-dollar deal. Naomi Carter stepped forward to speak, but Elena raised a hand. "I don't want apologies, Ms. Carter. I want an explanation for how an airline that just partnered with me can treat me like a trespasser." No one could respond immediately because what Elena sought wasn't platitudes, it was accountability. In that moment, Skypulse felt the weight of an impending crisis. Ethan Caldwell stood behind the counter, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles blanched. Elena's words echoed in his mind like a siren, "I was just told this line was for first-class passengers only." The ambient noise, Gate announcements, suitcase wheels, muffled intercoms, faded into a blur. All that remained was the stark truth: he had misjudged the wrong person. Not just any person, the one tied to a $52 million contract with his airline. His error was now undeniable. "Do you realize who you've detained?" Lila hissed again, her tone a mix of urgency and reproach. Ethan nodded stiffly, unable to speak. His thoughts churned, the training on rigid protocols, the emphasis on security first, the manager's advice to trust your instincts from the first look. That look, the one he'd used to judge Elena instead of processing her ticket, was now turning on him. He took a step back, but each movement felt anchored by the growing scrutiny of the crowd. Some travelers feigned distraction, scrolling on phones, others aimed cameras at the gate, drawn to a scene they sensed was momentous without grasping its full scope. "If I let her board now," Ethan murmured, "everyone will see I messed up." Lila looked away, silent. She knew the real issue wasn't Ethan's mistake, it was his attempt to preserve his ego while the system unraveled around him. Beyond the counter, near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac, Elena and Daniela spoke in hushed tones. Their body language signaled this was no mere service hiccup but a high-stakes negotiation between two pillars of a critical contract. In the legal department, Naomi was already briefing the crisis team via Skype's internal network. The issue extends beyond a gate agent's procedural lapse. It shows clear signs of bias. The contract is at risk. Media exposure is a concern. In Seattle, Marcus Webb read Daniela's update. "She's calm but not here for apologies." The words landed like a slow bruise, stinging Skype's polished brand. At gate 23, Ethan glanced at Elena. She wasn't towering or overtly commanding like the CEOs in corporate ads, but something about her presence silenced the room. It was her stillness, unshaken even with the security guard looming nearby. It was her steady gaze, seeking no validation, simply observing. That gaze shrank Ethan, not because she raised her voice, but because she didn't. Not because she reprimanded him, but because her eyes pinned the prejudice he'd dodged acknowledging. That was what unraveled him. He couldn't claim, "I was just following protocol." The truth was undeniable: Elena Vasquez had done everything right, and he, the one enforcing the rules, had made it all wrong. Elena calmly opened her leather satchel and withdrew a sleek, ivory folder. Inside was the original contract Vasquez Green Solutions had signed with Skype's, crisp white pages, black ink, 3 executive signatures still pristine. She didn't flourish it or slam it down. She handed it to Daniela with both hands, her movements deliberate. "I don't want a social media post or a canned apology letter," Elena said, her voice low but unwavering. "I want something real. Because the next person you treat like an outsider might not have your regional director's number or a multimillion-dollar contract in their bag." Ethan didn't catch the full exchange, but he saw something undeniable. Daniela, always poised and commanding in boardrooms, dipped her head just enough to reveal who truly held the upper hand. In the first-class cabin of the waiting flight, the crew received an urgent memo: VIP guest, CEO of Vasquez Green Solutions, boarding. Ensure utmost courtesy. Limit unnecessary interaction. Sophia, the lead flight attendant, steadied a bottle of sparkling water, smoothed the linen on seat 2A, and glanced toward the jetway door. She didn't know the full story, but one thing was clear: someone had crossed a woman the airline couldn't afford to slight. Elena Vasquez stood unwavering, her posture a pillar amid the crowd's murmurs. She didn't speak, even as eyes, curious, critical, or sympathetic, fixed on her. She didn't flinch when a man in a tailored jacket brushed past, muttering about avoidable drama. Her gaze drifted past them, through the terminal's vast windows where baggage carts rolled under the dawn's glow. In that distant view, she saw echoes of her younger self. Years ago, At a supplier summit, she'd entered a sleek conference room packed with executives in crisp suits. A staffer rushed over, hand outstretched, asking, "Are you here for catering or to pick up files?" Elena hadn't responded. She'd simply pulled her delegate badge from her satchel, set it on the table, and claimed a seat at the head. Another time, in a Miami dealership shopping for a fleet van, a salesman with a practiced grin sized her up and said, "You might prefer our pre-owned lot. These models are for corporate clients." Elena's smile was faint but sharp. "Good. I'm a corporate client." She walked out, no purchase needed, no argument required. For her, power wasn't in confrontation, it was in knowing her worth and needing no one's approval to embody it. Today, at Gate 23 in Miami International, history repeated itself. But this time, Elena wasn't just weathering bias, she was forcing an entire system to confront its flaws. When Daniela Torres offered her hand, gesturing toward the jetway with unprecedented deference, and when Naomi Carter, Skypulse brand lead, lowered her gaze in a silent apology for the airline, Elena didn't dwell on their error. She wanted them to grasp its source. "Ms. Vasquez, please proceed." "The crew is ready," Daniela said, her tone subdued, stepping back to clear the path. Elena gave a slight nod, her expression neither triumphant nor conciliatory, and moved forward, walking a path she knew was hers, even if it had been unjustly obstructed. At the aircraft's entrance, under the jetway's stark lights, Sophia stood ready. She offered a subtle bow, opening the cabin door with a reverence reserved for no other passenger. "Welcome, Ms. Vasquez. Please let us know if you need anything before we depart," she said softly, her actions an apology in motion. Elena didn't respond verbally, only nodded, handed over her satchel, and stepped into the first-class cabin. Seat 2A awaited, plush leather, a pristine fold-down table, a chilled bottle of water beside a crisp napkin. She settled in, adjusted the headrest, and didn't glance around to meet anyone's eyes. There was no need. Every gaze was already on her. Outside, Ethan Caldwell stood rooted behind the counter, his face drained of color. Lila, who had stayed quiet until now, leaned in, her whisper cutting through his daze. "That's the woman supplying every first-class meal with farm-fresh produce. The face of our Green Skies campaign. And you tried to block her because you felt she didn't belong." Ethan's mouth opened, but no defense emerged. No one silenced him, but he knew any justification would ring hollow against the truth. On the plane, Sophia turned to Elena with a quiet remark. "I heard your keynote at the Sustainability Summit last year. My cousin was studying logistics, but after your talk, she switched to agribusiness. Said you made it feel possible. Thank you." For the first time since leaving the gate, Elena's lips curved into a faint, genuine smile. "Then she's on the right path," she said softly. Her gaze shifted to the window, where dawn's light glinted off the wing, shimmering like the calm after a squall. Elena's earlier words still reverberated in Daniela Torres' mind as they'd walked through the private jetway, the terminal's stark lights casting long shadows. "Curious, because I was just told this line was for first-class passengers only." Her tone hadn't been loud or biting, but each syllable struck at the core of Skypulse's identity. Daniela, who had navigated the airline through a major labor dispute and revamped its southern operations, had never felt so diminished. She didn't reply, not for lack of words, but because anything she said would sound like an excuse. Instead, she offered a slight nod, a silent admission, "We failed, and you owe us no further proof." As Elena settled into seat 2A, the first-class cabin seemed to exhale, a subtle shift in the air. The crew, Sophia, the beverage lead, and others, moved with heightened care, not out of fear but from an unspoken recognition of the moment's weight. Elena requested nothing, no drink, no table set up. She sat, hands lightly clasped, her eyes fixed on the Miami runway where light spilled across the tarmac. Meanwhile, in a tense conference room on the airport's 11th floor, Daniela led an emergency session. Heads of HR, legal, and PR were present. Naomi Carter, who had trailed Elena to the plane, returned, loosening her badge as if it carried a burden. "We can't wait for this to hit the news," Daniela said sharply. "I need names of everyone involved, a draft for internal comms, and a report on actions taken before takeoff." "What if Vasquez posts about it?" a PR manager asked. Daniela gave a wry, bitter smile. "She won't need to. One passenger's photo from that gate, one clip uploaded, and it'll spread like wildfire." Sure enough, on an obscure X account, a post emerged, a grainy image of Elena at gate 23. Woman stopped at MIA gate. No yelling, no scene. But when she made a call, the system quaked. Hashtag sprouted, hashtag gate 23, hashtag quiet strength, hashtag green skies fumble. In Seattle, Marcus Webb read the post, his jaw tight. No dramatic footage, no heated confrontation, just a still image of Elena's composure. "That's why it spread faster. We can't spin this," Marcus said over a call to Daniela. "But we can shape our response," she replied curtly. "I know. And I know Ms. Vasquez doesn't want a statement. She wants the next person like her to walk up to that counter and not be left standing in silence." In the first-class cabin, Elena Vasquez closed her eyes, not from weariness but to still the hum of past echoes. She recalled her first delivery to Skypulse, pallets of vibrant greens and heirloom tomatoes, her team's quiet pride as they stocked the airline's galleys. That memory felt distant, yet its truth endured. Her strength shone brightest when she stood resolute. She'd driven the van herself that day, hauling delicate arugula and sweet peppers to Skypulse's test kitchen. She once believed financial success would erase bias. But reality taught her otherwise. Prejudice doesn't fade, it lurks, waiting for a moment to resurface. A flight attendant approached softly. "Ms. Vasquez, we've prepared a special meal with ingredients from your farms." Elena opened her eyes and shook her head gently. "I'm not hungry. Don't try to fix this. Just let it be." The attendant nodded, retreating in silent understanding. Outside, 3 adjacent gates flashed delayed, internal issue on their screens. No details were shared, but internally, boarding was halted. Daniela Torres had made the call, "This can't happen again, not until we root out every Ethan wielding that subtle, ruinous power." As Elena sat in seat 2A, her gaze drifting to the cloud streaking past the window, her silence had sparked a reckoning no speech could rival. Morning light filtered through the 2A window, catching the edge of an ivory envelope Elena drew from her satchel. With measured calm, she placed it on the tray table, not directed at anyone but positioned where it couldn't be ignored. Daniela, lingering nearby, hesitated. This wasn't defiance or theatrics, it was a precise, unyielding statement. Elena opened the envelope and slid out the original Skypulse contract, signed 6 weeks prior. Bold text, corporate logo, internal codes, and 3 signatures stood stark: Elena Vasquez, CEO of Vasquez Green Solutions; Marcus Webb, In-Flight Services Director; Clara Dunn, Southern Legal Counsel. She pushed it toward Daniela, letting the silence carry its weight before speaking. "This is the contract," Elena said, her voice steady, not sharp but heavy, each word landing like a stone. "Your first-class menus. That's me. The eco-lounge you're promoting. That's me. The supply chain that pulled Skypulse out of its meal scandal. That's me." Daniela took the document, her hands unsteady, not from fear of Elena but from the mirror it held up to her airline's failures. "And today," Elena continued, "the woman flagged as a risk, detained without cause, judged because she didn't fit your mold, that are the same woman whose produce fills every tray on this flight." Her voice stayed level, but the cabin hung on every syllable. Sophia, the lead flight attendant, stood nearby, silent but attentive, as if witnessing truth being set right. A passenger in 2C, a woman in a tailored blazer, gave a subtle nod, her eyes signaling agreement. This was a moment that demanded attention. Elena wasn't done. She drew a handwritten note from the envelope, its message brief: "No apologies needed. Fix your system before touting values." She placed it beside the contract and met Daniela's gaze. "I don't want a PR post or a formal letter. I want change. Change doesn't come from hashtags, it comes from retraining every gate agent." Daniela, who knew Elena as reserved and gracious in vendor files, seemed stunned by her clarity and steel. "I understand," she murmured. "Good," Elena said. "Because the next person stopped at your counter might not have a contract to leverage. They could be my daughter or any traveler you diminished despite their ticket." Skypulse's internal systems were in overdrive. HR scoured violation logs from Miami's gates. PR paused the Green Skies campaign pending a crisis plan. Legal drafted an anti-bias policy update for frontline staff, set to roll out within 48 hours. Naomi Carter, back in the cabin after Daniela's briefing, watched as Elena neatly folded the documents into her satchel, her movements deliberate, unshaken. Naomi Carter understood this wasn't just a reminder, it was a reckoning. Elena didn't need to leverage media threats. By placing a contract in plain view, she forced a corporate giant to confront its flaws. Elena eased back in her seat, eyes closing not from exhaustion but because the power struggle had ended, and the ripple effects were just beginning. The jetway door to the first-class cabin swung open again, admitting two men in sharp suits, their faces taut with barely veiled dismay. Marcus Webb, Skypulse in-flight services director, clutched a hastily assembled file, papers secured with a single clip. Beside him, Naomi Carter, the airline Southern legal counsel, carried an unzipped briefcase, as if they'd rushed from a crisis meeting without pausing to tidy up. They didn't pause for formalities. Both headed straight to seat 2A, where Elena Vasquez sat, arms loosely crossed, her gaze steady as steel. "Ms. Vasquez," Marcus began, his tone urgent. "I'm deeply sorry for this unacceptable incident. I can't fathom how this happened." "We'll do everything to," Elena cut him off, her voice calm, barely above a whisper, yet it stopped both men cold. "I don't need apologies. I need you to rethink how you see people. Stop hiding bias behind protocols." Naomi, who had drafted countless diversity policies and championed inclusion initiatives, stood mute, not for lack of words, but because none sufficed. Elena's eyes met hers, not with anger but with a piercing clarity that cut deeper than reproach. "You've got your campaigns, your posters, your equity pledges. But when a Latina woman stands at your counter with a first-class ticket, your staff still chooses suspicion over a barcode scan. That's not in your policies, it's in their heads." Daniela Torres, lingering behind, didn't interject. For the first time in her tenure, she lowered her head to a partner, not to placate, but to concede. Silence settled, brief but heavy. No one spoke further. The moment didn't need elaboration. Apologies couldn't erase the sting of being judged for one's skin, gender, or presence. Daniela exhaled and signaled the crew to reopen the jetway. The Seattle-bound flight, now 32 minutes behind schedule, remained grounded. But no one at Skypulse hurried. The real delay wasn't on the tarmac, it was in the mindset that demanded an overhaul. The door shut. Marcus and Naomi exited, offering no more assurances or business cards, just a silence weightier than any rehearsed speech. Sophia, the lead flight attendant, approached Elena quietly. "Ms. Vasquez," she said softly, "thank you. Not for the contract, but for standing firm. I wish my aunt could have done that when she was turned away at a store for looking out of place. Elena met Sophia's gaze, seeing in her eyes a flicker of old pain, a wound left unaddressed. She didn't speak, only nodded, a small gesture that connected two lives touched by the same snap judgment. Meanwhile, at 3 nearby gates, Skypulse flights flashed delayed, operational review. Boarding paused across the southeast hub, unexplained to passengers but triggered by an internal mandate, a silent audit of frontline staff conduct, disrupting schedules for 4 hours. It began with one call, one misplaced glance, one perfectly timed silence. Elena leaned back in 2A, eyes closed. She felt neither triumph nor relief, only a resolve to rebuild from the roots, starting with those who never thought they needed to learn how to truly see others. Seat 2A, booked months ago, held her steady, a quiet anchor in a system now forced to reckon with itself. No one mentioned it was a first-class seat. No one spoke of elite privileges. They didn't need to. Elena's presence alone made it clear who belonged there. Sophia, the lead flight attendant, said nothing. She gently took Elena's satchel, secured its strap, and placed it carefully at her feet. She opened a bottle of sparkling water, poured it into a crystal-rimmed glass, and set it on the tray table. She didn't ask, "What do you want?" Instead, she murmured, "If you need anything, just let me know." Elena gave a slight nod, neither accepting nor declining. Her hands rested lightly in her lap, her back upright against the leather seat, her eyes fixed on the window where dawn's glow swept across the tarmac, as if trying to erase a lingering shadow. She didn't touch the glass, didn't reach for her phone. She simply gazed across the cabin. Other first-class passengers began to notice. Some fiddled with their earbuds, others shifted to peer out the opposite windows, but their attention wasn't on the view. They were watching Elena, their thoughts unspoken but palpable. The woman in 2C, a consultant with a sleek smartwatch, tapped her screen absently, her eyes darting away. A man in 1B, clad in a pinstripe suit, adjusted his glasses and opened a tablet but stared blankly at the screen. No one spoke or offered apologies. Elena didn't need them to. Their uneasy silence was its own admission. From the rear of the cabin, a young flight attendant, barely in her mid-20s, approached with a small tray bearing a handwritten note and a foil-wrapped chocolate. She set it before Elena and whispered, her voice tinged with nervous sincerity, "From me and some of the crew. We don't know the full story, but we know something went wrong. We just want you to know not everyone looked away." Elena turned to her, her expression steady but her gaze softening. She didn't smile, but the young woman felt the weight of her acknowledgement. The note read, "Thank you for standing firm. You showed us when to speak up." Elena brushed her fingers along the card's edge, leaving it on the tray as if inviting others to see it and question why someone needed thanks for simply holding their ground. At Skypulse's Miami office, Daniela Torres convened the crisis team. A screen displayed an alert, Flight 392 MIA to SEA, 41 minutes delayed. Reason, review of priority passenger protocols. No one dared probe further. Daniela stood before a digital whiteboard, her expression weary but firm. "We don't fix errors with haste. We fix them by facing what we've ignored." A PR team member ventured, "Will Ms. Vasquez go public?" Daniela paused, recalling Elena's piercing words, "I don't want a letter. I want action." After a beat, she said, "She won't need to. The witnesses will tell her story." As predicted, in an airport lounge, a passenger posted on X, "Didn't know her at first, just a Latina woman with a first-class ticket stopped at gate 23. But after one call, the whole terminal froze. No yelling, no drama. Just a system rattled." The post spread quietly, not with sensational headlines but through communities that valued composure and understood the cost of unchecked bias. On the plane, the engines hummed, the wings tilted. Elena closed her eyes, not to rest but to reflect. She recalled being turned away from a nursery as a girl, clutching coins for a daisy for her grandmother. She remembered submitting a supplier bid only to be handed a janitorial application. And now, she saw Ethan's eyes when she presented the contract, not with triumph or rage, but with unyielding truth. That was power, no need for raised voices, no clamor for attention, just the quiet force of being right, spreading like embers under frost. As Skypulse's jet pulled away from Miami's runway, there were no cheers, no flashing lights. The delayed flight lifted off. But everyone aboard sensed they weren't just passengers, they'd witnessed a moment where silence struck louder than any protest. Skypulse's operational system flagged 6 flights delayed concurrently, with cryptic notices, delayed, internal staff realignment. Awaiting frontline protocol review. Processing VIP passenger verification. Murmurs rippled through the terminal. A janitor shook his head, muttering, "Something's up. They're summoning execs to the 8th floor." A traveler leaned toward her companion, "Heard they stopped someone for not looking first class. Turns out she's the CEO behind Skypulse's meal overhaul." Talk about picking the wrong fight. "Wrong person, wrong moment," her friend replied. No official word came, but the airport seemed to hold its breath. In Skypulse's 12th floor Miami office, all Gate 23 staff were quietly pulled from duty, no public announcement made. No terminations were finalized, but a question loomed, one rarely probed: who decides what first class looks like? How many have been sidelined not for errors, but for failing to match someone's preconception? Ethan Caldwell, who'd hesitated to scan Elena's ticket, found his name absent from the next day's roster. He left the check-in area wordlessly, colleagues' gazes sliding away, not out of ignorance, but from knowing too much. Lila, who tried to caution Ethan, stayed on. In a quiet meeting room, where revised checklists were being printed, she sat, fingers tracing the rim of a cold tea mug. A coworker whispered, "Is this really such a big deal?" Lila didn't look up. "Some people don't need to yell," she murmured. "They stand still, and the whole terminal feels it." Meanwhile, in Seattle, Skypulse Flight 392 touched down smoothly. Elena Vasquez didn't rise as others scrambled for bags, checked phones, or hailed rides. She remained seated, hands folded in her lap, her presence unhurried. She'd already claimed the day's greatest triumph. As she disembarked, no one questioned her ticket or ID. Only respectful glances followed, from Sophia, the crew, and a subtle nod from the captain, not for status but for truth. Elena stepped into the arrivals hall, where a driver held a sign, E. Vasquez, Vasquez Green Solutions. In the back of a sleek black sedan, her phone hummed with notifications. An email from Daniela Torres, "We're overhauling our passenger access protocols." A text from Sofia Mendez, "You've done what no DEI training could." They're rewriting the entire manual. A link to a regional news site, Latina CEO halted at airport, her silence upend system. Elena didn't click. She didn't need to read their words, she'd already spoken through her actions. At the Westin Hotel, hosting the Global Eco-Food Summit, the conference hall buzzed. Whispers circulated, "Elena Vasquez is here. Heard she was stopped at Miami this morning. Is that true? They say Skypulse paused all Southeast operations over it." When Elena entered through a side door, no one stood or applauded. But the room's energy shifted. She moved deliberately, chin high, light catching the emerald pin on her blazer, Vasquez Green Solutions logo. No introduction was given. None was needed. She stepped forward, a living testament to resilience at precisely the right moment. When the MC took the microphone, her voice wavering as she introduced Elena Vasquez and beckoned her to the stage with a tight smile, Elena nodded calmly, grasped the mic, and spoke with unshakable clarity. "I won't dwell on this morning's events. I'll speak to what allowed them to happen, and what we, in food systems, in logistics, in shaping economies, must do better." Elena stood at the podium in the Westin's conference hall, hosting the Global Eco-Food Summit, as if the morning's ordeal at Miami International had never occurred. No hint of hurt, no flicker of resentment, just a poised presence. Her gaze swept the front row, where agribusiness tycoons, retail chain executives, airline reps, and sustainability advocates sat rapt, silent. No one mentioned Gate 23. No whispers of, "Is that her?" or, "We heard what happened." But Elena knew they knew. The room knew. She opened not with fanfare but with a story about carrots. 2 years ago, a family farm we partner with in Oregon nearly lost its crop. Why? A misrouted order. A temp worker skipped a confirmation, thinking it wasn't critical. One small choice nearly disrupted the entire Northwest supply chain for 10 days. Heads tilted forward. Notebooks opened. We point fingers at tech glitches or management. But often, the issue isn't the system, it's snap judgments about people. The air grew still. Her voice wasn't raised, but every eye locked on her, as if each listener was quietly re-evaluating their own biases, executives and staff alike. Elena paused, then pressed on. You can have airtight protocols, AI-driven logistics, barcodes on every crate. But if an employee glances at someone and thinks, they don't belong in this role because of their clothes, you don't have a supply chain. You have bias, boxed and delivered. Silence gripped the room, heavy, like a dam about to breach. No one coughed or shifted. I don't care about your ad budgets, she said. I want to know who's empowered to dismiss someone, and based on what. A summit organizer in the back sank into his seat. A grocery chain VP tugged at his tie, eyes downcast. I've been turned away from a boardroom because I didn't look like a CEO. I've been sent to a loading dock after signing a multi-million-dollar deal because a guard assumed I was a courier. And this morning, a woman like me had to flash a contract, credentials, and her own dignity just to cross a line she'd already earned. No one needed clarification, the morning's events hung unspoken but undeniable. Elena lowered her gaze briefly, then closed. We can streamline shipping routes and cut spoilage rates, but don't rush the moment you judge a person. That's where rot starts, not in the produce, but in the glance. Applause rose, not a roar but a steady swell, from those who grasped the weight, who'd misjudged before, who'd now hesitate to do so again. As Elena left the stage, a woman in a navy blazer, badge reading supply chain director, coastal markets, approached in the hallway. She hesitated, then said softly, your line about rushing judgment, it'll change how I train my team. Elena gave a faint smile, eyes forward. That's enough, she murmured. That's why I stood my ground. Elena Vasquez walked on, no fanfare, no cameras, just the piercing clarity of truth, sharp and unyielding. After her speech at the Westin's Global Eco-Food Summit, Elena left as composed as she'd arrived. No press scrum trailed her, no social media posts followed. When a journalist from Green Business Review sought an exclusive on the Gate 23 incident, Elena shook her head. I'm here to discuss sustainable supply chains, not airport missteps. A cable news outlet invited her to a panel on bias in aviation. Her reply was brief, silence isn't passivity, but not every fight needs a spotlight. No one was publicly called out. No names were splashed across headlines. No lawsuits emerged from Vasquez Green Solutions. Yet Skypulse began to shift internally, and no one mistook it for chance. Within a week, Skypulse quietly partnered with Fair Path Alliance, a nonprofit focused on racial equity audits and bias-free workplace restructuring. The move was announced in an internal memo, not a press release, but industry insiders recognized it as an unspoken act of accountability. Over the next 3 months, all Skypulse frontline staff underwent mandatory training on implicit bias and snap judgments. HR classified flawed passenger screening as a Tier 2 violation. Cultural competency became a core performance metric, not just a checkbox. Gate 23, where the upheaval began, was briefly closed for a procedural overhaul. Elena's name stayed out of the news, but every employee on that shift knew why they spent 6 hours reviewing footage and dissecting protocols. In a modest Tampa kitchen, where a chipped ceramic mug sat under a clock perpetually 3 minutes slow, Rosa Vasquez read a trade journal piece, Elena Vasquez's Quiet Force, a CEO who reshaped systems through values, not litigation. Rosa placed it on the worn table where Elena once puzzled over algebra at age 11, lit by a buzzing fluorescent bulb. She smiled faintly, no fanfare, and murmured, "That's my granddaughter." She never needed to shout to be heard. At a rival airline's HR meeting, the director displayed a slide with Elena's summit photo, quoting her, "Don't rush judging a person, that's where rot begins, not in the crate, but in the glance." A manager asked, "What's that from?" The director replied, "Not a textbook. It's real. Ignore it, and we'll be the next ones scrambling to fix our mistakes." Elena resumed her work at Vasquez Green Solutions. The Skypulse contract hummed along, with shipments of arugula, zucchini, and citrus rolling from southern farms to airline hubs. No company blog mentioned the incident, no victory banners hung. But in Elena's office, where photos of her early market stall lined the walls instead of plaques, a new note was tacked to a corkboard. Handwritten by an anonymous passenger, it read, "I saw you stay silent, yet the airport froze. Thank you for showing me that the strongest stand is refusing to stoop to those who judge you." From someone who thought they knew first class and now thinks twice. Elena read it, folded it, and turned to a spring planting schedule. She didn't seek applause or cries for justice. She just kept doing what was right, letting silence carry the weight. In a world quick to judge by looks or seat assignments, Elena Vasquez proved one truth: real power lies not in loud demands but in precise actions at the pivotal moment. No shouting, no legal battles, just standing firm, forcing systems to reflect. Have you seen someone judged unfairly for not fitting in? Share your story below. Change often starts with tales like these. If this resonates, like, share with friends, and follow for more true, transformative stories from across the globe. Until the next journey.